Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all feeling okay on the TARDIS. I have to give you a warning if I make any mistakes today. I'm without my coffee, so nothing I say can be trusted. So an assumption of treat all my words with a little bit of suspicion. So we were looking at Shittas Rashi in the Sugya, the very difficult view of Rashi, and there's basically a number of flashpoints between Rashi and Tosfos. The first point is whether Rashi learns that we're talking about when the Gemara gives an answer, and the Gemara says that Rava says you are potter from the Tilas Neshama because Misasik who ate on the Tilas Neshama. Rashi learns that, well, Tosfos says this doesn't mean Misasik, this really means Dover She'enu Miskavin. Kavanos Rashi is not entirely clear what he means. He calls this Misasik. And then he says it's not a melachot Mashaves because it's not Miskavin Shiyomas. And then when the Gemara asks that it's nonetheless a situation, answers it's Lo Nichale, Rashi seems to explicitly say that this doesn't mean apathy or neutrality, it means you are positively negative, you're actually against it. You don't want the result to happen, and again Tosfos challenges that. So we began looking at why Rashi holds that for Dover She'enu Miskavin, Pesik Reisha, you're only exempt if you don't want it, you're not just exempt if you're neutral to it. And I think I mentioned the Ramban, who learns that really Rashi isn't talking about intentions, Rashi is talking about fact. The Gemara's answer is that it's not a Pesik Reisha because you're squeezing it with care, trying to avoid killing it because you don't want it killed, because that will lessen the quality of the dye. That's how the Ramban learns the Sugya, which is a neat resolution to the problems in Rashi. All Rashi is saying is it's not a Pesik Reisha. Nonetheless, this doesn't appear to fit the Lashon of Rashi, who does seem to say we're talking about kavanah and intentionality rather than anything else. So if we take Rashi on face value, there is a machlokas, a very significant and practical machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos, whether a Dover She'enu Miskavin, Pesik Reisha, which you're neutral about, is enough to exempt you, or it's not enough to exempt you if you're neutral about it. You're only exempt if you are positively against the result. And the lomdus of the machlokas, if this is to be taken at face value, is that Rashi holds neutrality is not enough. If I'm neutral about the result, nonetheless, since this is an inevitable consequence, this is inherent in the action I did, and I can't claim this Dover She'enu Miskavin. It's only when I positively don't want the result, where there's an active wish against the result, that I can argue this wrenches them away and separates the two. That would be the pshat in Rashi. Now, Tosfos asks a question on Rashi. Tosfos asks from the Gemara in Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says that if you do a melacha, or you water or something like that, in Ara de Chavrei, in your mate's land, in your co-farmer's land, not in your own land, then since lo ichbas le liyafo, since you have no desire to improve your neighbor's field, that would be enough to exempt you from the Pesik Reisha that's inherent in your result, in your action. Says Tosfos, we see that lo ichbas le neutrality is enough. Now I just want to point out in the maths of the Sugya, we could answer Rashi by saying that Gemara is talking about a friend you dislike, you positively dislike, and you don't want to enhance their field, and therefore you have a desire for the result not to happen rather than it being merely neutral. So Tosfos says, the Gemara there answers that you did the melacha in Ara de Chavrei, in your fellow's field, not in your own field. Tosfos understands that to be neutrality. You could understand it to be that you positively don't want it, you dislike the fellow, you don't want to enhance his field, and therefore that's how Tosfos Rashi would understand, which is also consistent with his view that you are positively trying not to cause that result. Now, this is very nice in theory and would be a good answer to Tos's question, other than that Rashi there explains that indeed it's lo ichbas lo. If you have a look at the commentary of Rashi down the Sugya, Rashi doesn't say this is a neighbor who you dislike. He says lo ichbas lo, you're neutral, you don't care. So we have a head-on clash between the Rashis, and this is pointed out by Rabbi Kiva Eger. So just to summarize, Tosfos asks the question as if we have a Gemara against the view of Rashi, because the Gemara says that if you are doing a melacha in the field of your friend, you are pater. Says Tosfos, that's lo ichbas le, you are neutral. A possible answer to this question in the Gemara could be that in the Gemara you don't see head-on clash. Maybe the Gemara is talking about neutrality also, where you don't care. However, maybe the Gemara is not talking about neutrality. Maybe the Gemara, however, if we would learn the Gemara isn't talking about neutrality, but it's talking about positively not wanting the damage, then we would have an answer to the Shiur that Tosfos asked in the Gemara. Rabbi Kiva Eger points out that this still wouldn't help resolve things, because even if it's not a Shiur in the Gemara, it's a Shiur in Rashi, because Rashi there says, lo ichbas le, you don't care. Now, how are we going to answer Rashi? How are we going to resolve this issue? What does Rashi mean? So there's several things one could say. For now, I'm going to assume that the Pshat in Rashi is indeed going with Dover She'eino Miskavein, and that Rashi is indeed saying that here you need not apathy, but lo nichale, you actually don't want it. What could we answer in Rashi? How could we justify Rashi? So I think someone asked me last week, and I mentioned the answer of the Ritva. Someone asked me, according to Tosfos, I think Edward perhaps, was it? I think maybe Edward asked me, I don't remember. Someone asked me, according to Tosfos, why do you need a lo nichale? If Tosfos is correct that apathy is enough, why does the Gemara say that you have a negative reaction, that lo nichale, you don't want it? So in the Ritva asks this question, and I printed the Ritva in the source sheet in source 9, I think it was. I don't remember actually if I printed that on the source sheet that I gave out to you or just printed on the WhatsApp group. But the Ritva indeed asks this question. According to Tosfos, why do you have to say there's no nichale? So the Ritva gives two answers to this question. He either says kushta de milsonokat. It's the truth. In the Londus, all you need is neutrality. It happens to be you're not neutral here, you're actually against it because you don't want to damage the dye. This is one answer the Ritva gives. The second answer the Ritva gives is that here we need to answer the Gemara even according to Rabbi Yehuda, because the Gemara is on simplest reading is asking on Rabbi Shimon, why are you not also chayev for netilas neshama? In other words, why does Rabbi Shimon or the Tanna Kama say you're only chayev one? Surely you should also be chayev two, an additional melachot of netilas neshama. Now we could ask the same question to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that besides being chayev for the hunting or the trapping of the Chilazon, you're also chayev for the pitzia, which is the Disha, which is threshing and extracting the blood from the Chilazon. Now, why aren't you also chayev, according to Rabbi Yehuda, for a third melacha of netilas neshama, of killing the Chilazon? Now, you can't answer to that question, simply answer the question by saying that it's a davar she'eino miskavein, because Rabbi Shimon holds that go adam mitaso, that you can drag a bench on Shabbos and be mutter to do so because it's davar she'eino miskavein. Rabbi Yehuda holds not like Rabbi Shimon. Either he holds your asa, or perhaps even holds your chayev. If you're chayev, how would the Gemara answer according to Rabbi Shimon? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's true this is a davar she'eino miskavein, but nonetheless, a davar she'eino miskavein according to Rabbi Yehuda is chayev. So asks really the Ramban on the sugya. The Ritva uses this as an answer in the sugya, and he says this is the answer according to Rabbi Yehuda, who is who says that you are exempt for you are chayev for davar she'eino miskavein. We still need an answer to the question of why you would be exempt over here. And on that, the Gemara answers, because you actively don't want this to happen, which the Ritva interprets to mean you are makalkel. Since you are makalkel, since you are damaging it by killing the animal because it ruins the dye, therefore that would be enough to exempt you from the melacha according to Rabbi Yehuda because of mekalkel. Now, this is a good explanation of the Gemara according to Tosfos. This explanation doesn't work in Rashi, because Rashi doesn't say the exemption is because of mekalkel. Rashi says the exemption is because you don't want it to happen. So Rashi says about kavanah, Rashi doesn't say it's because it's mekalkel. Rashi says it's because of kavanah, because you don't want it to happen. However, we could give an alternative. No, sorry, sorry. Let me say this again, because I was aware as I was saying it, I wasn't being entirely clear. Again, let's just summarize. According to the Gemara asks the question, why are you not chayiv from the Tzilas Neshama? The flow of the Gemara implies it's asking this question on Rabbi Shimon, or the Tanakama, who only says you're chayiv one. Why aren't you chayiv a second one from the Tzilas Neshama? But we can ask a parallel question, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why are you not chayiv a third one from the Tzilas Neshama? Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayiv for tzad and for dosh. Why aren't you also chayiv from the Tzilas Neshama? So let's do the maths of the sugya according to Rabbi Yehuda. Why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not chayiv for the Tzilas Neshama? Now, one answer to the question would be because of mekalkel. Even though you can't answer according to Rabbi Yehuda that lo nichale, which means melacha shein tzricha legufa, as Tosfos explains. Tosfos says that neutrality is enough because it's not a melacha shein tzricha legufa. Rabbi Yehuda holds that melacha shein tzricha legufa is chayiv. So why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, are you exempt from the Tzilas Neshama? Answers the Ritva because of mekalkel. And that's why he explains, according to Tosfos, why the Gemara needs to point out, there's not just neutral, you don't care about the death of the Chilazon, you don't want the death of the Chilazon because it's actually damaging, it's mekalkel. That's how the Ritva learns. This is not a good Peshat in Rashi, because Rashi is talking about intentionality. Rashi doesn't say the reason you don't need to not want to do it is because it would be mekalkel. He says it's the reason you need to not want to do it is because you need the negative force. When you're neutral, says Rashi, that would be a psik reisha. Only when you're actively against it is it enough for p'tur. So this is not a good reading of Rashi. However, there's a second reading of Rashi, following the same thought inspired by Rabbi Shimon, by the Ritva, that Rashi is coming to explain, according to Rabbi Yehuda, why you exempt. According to Rabbi Shimon, neutrality is enough. Rashi would agree with Tosfos because of melacha shein tzricha legufa. But what about according to Rabbi Yehuda? Melacha shein tzricha legufa doesn't help according to Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, Rashi had to explain that there was a positive kavanah against it, and therefore that would help because of the positive kavanah against it. Now, I don't think this is a good reading in Rashi because Rashi seemingly is going according to Rabbi Yehuda, not according to Rabbi Shimon, not according to Rabbi Yehuda. I think the flow of Rashi clearly is in the Gemara according to Rabbi Yehuda, not according to Rabbi Shimon, not according to Rabbi Yehuda.
So does it mean, though, when you've got positive intention against it, that it's just no longer in the world of davar she'eina mitkaven? Does that mean you're no longer in that world? It's just you've not done, as you're positively against it, it's no longer classified as davar she'eina mitkaven. Is that the point?
Correct, yes. The positive intention against it wrenches it away from kavanah. That would be the suggestion in Rashi.
Okay.
Yeah. In other words, Rashi, we discussed last week that not having kavanah can mean lots of different things. In this model, Rashi would learn neutrality is not enough to be called Eino Miskavein. Certainly not in the case of psik reisha, where it is inherent in the action that the consequence will happen. And therefore, Rashi says it's only when you have a active intention against it that wrenches it away from being a psik reisha, being considered kavanah. Why does Rashi need to say that? Surely we see in the Gemara later that even neutrality is enough. The attempted answer would be in order to explain Rabbi Yehuda. I don't think this is a good reading in Rashi. Rashi doesn't mention a word about Rabbi Yehuda over here. Okay, so what other explanations can we give in Rashi? Another explanation would be Tosfos, and this is I think a very important point in the maths of the sugya. Tosfos says, why is apathy enough? Answers Tosfos because it's a davar. It's a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. You don't have a motive in doing it, and since you don't have the motive for doing it, that's a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Again, I want to stress over here, we use in kavanah in lots of different terms and lots of different ways. A melacha she'ein tzricha legufa, a davar she'ein miskavein is an unintended side consequence. That means I don't want to do the action at all. A melacha she'ein tzricha legufa is I want to do the action, however, I don't want it's not targeted specifically enough. Tosfos learns that means it's not targeted for the same purpose as I was doing it as it's done in the Mishkan. Rashi learns it wasn't targeted for a positive, it was targeted for a removal of a problem, like for example catching an insect to stop it stinging rather than wanting the insect at all. Says Tosfos, the reason why in a Dover She'ein Miskavein, unintended side consequence, Sik Reisha, which will definitely happen, which it shouldn't be viewed as a Dover She'ein Miskavein because it's inherent in my action. The reason why if I am neutral, I'm exempt, is because of a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. I don't have, it's not targeted for the purpose that I need, and therefore I am exempt from melacha. That's how Tosfos understands why neutrality is enough. And Tosfos asked in Rashi, why would Rashi disagree with this? Why wouldn't Rashi say that neutrality is enough in our sugya also? So asks Tosfos. And we're trying to understand what Rashi's answer would be. So one answer we gave in Rashi is that Rashi here is trying to explain Rabbi Yehuda. We agreed that doesn't fit the Lashon of Rashi. A second answer, a second way of explaining this is that there's an unspoken assumption in Tosfos. Because Tosfos began the whole sugya by pointing out that netilas neshama or chaburah, injury, is a mekalkal type malacha. It's a negative type malacha. It's a destructive type malacha. Nonetheless, according to Rabbi Shimon, according to, Tosfos points out that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you are potter, according to Rabbi Shimon, you are chayev in this case over here, by mekalkel, because he holds that chaburah, netilas neshama, is an exception. It's an inherently negative malacha, and therefore you don't need meleches machshaves. Now, if you don't need meleches machshaves with the malacha of chaburah or netilas neshama, is it obvious that you need malacha she'ein tzricha legufa? Does the requirement of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa apply? Tosfos assumes that the requirement of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa applies by netilas neshama and chaburah, and therefore he says it's enough that you are apathetic about the result, because it's not targeted, you don't have intentionality, you're not trying to achieve a positive purpose, and therefore it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Tosfos concludes by saying, I'm not quite sure about this, because you could argue that the reason for malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is meleches machshaves, and therefore it wouldn't apply to the malacha of netilas neshama chaburah, where according to Rabbi Shimon, the need for meleches machshaves doesn't apply because these are inherently destructive malachas. However, the bottom line is in Tosfos that Tosfos holds that the rule of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa applies to chaburah, meaning to say the reason for the exemption of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, according to Tosfos, is not because of meleches machshaves, because meleches machshaves doesn't apply by chaburah because it's a negative malacha, but there's some other exemption. Were Rashi to hold that malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is also a meleches machshaves type rule, then we would have an answer to Rashi. Rashi holds over here that neutrality is insufficient because that doesn't make it a melacha she'ein tzricha legufa over here because of the din of meleches machshaves, and therefore you need a positively, an actively negative intention in order to wrench it away from being a davar of Sik Reisha. Why would the rule of melacha she'ein tzricha legufa not apply over here? Because it's mekalkel, and with mekalkel you don't need meleches machshaves. So to put this differently, to make this a little clearer, it turns out that we're suggesting a machlokus between Rashi and Tosfos about what the exemption of melacha she'ein tzricha legufa is. Is it its own exemption, in which case it would apply to mekalkel also, or is it part of the family of exemptions of meleches machshaves, of targeted melachas, which wouldn't apply to mekalkel, because mekalkel is an exception, according to Rabbi Shimon, from the rule of meleches machshaves. Now we've already seen, and I put this on the source sheet, that Rashi and Tosfos argue over whether you need what the definition of melacha she'ein tzricha legufa is. Tosfos learns that it means any melacha that isn't done in the Mishkan. Any melacha that wasn't done for the same reason as it was done in the Mishkan. That means to say it's not about the positive intentionality of the melacha, it's about the melacha needing to be dumya to Mishkan, paralleling what happens in the Mishkan. Rashi learns it's any melacha which isn't done for a positive reason, but done to remove a problem. That sounds like classic meleches machshaves. I need to engage in a creative act in order to do something targeted and purposeful. So it would be good that Rashi learned that the P'tur of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa is part of the family of Melachas Mashaves, and therefore wouldn't apply to Mekalkel, which is a Melachas Mashaves exemption, which the rule of Melachas Mashaves doesn't apply to. Whereas Tosfos learns that it is his own exemption, it's part of Dumiyat Mishkan, the Melacha not being parallel to that which was done in the Mishkan, and therefore this would apply, the exemption of Melachas Mashaves, of the Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa would apply even in Mekalkel, and therefore Tosfos says that it's enough that Lo Nichale. Let me try and summarize this again and make this crystal clear. I apologize if I'm confusing people. I feel my clarity is not up to par today because I'm already affected by the verse. Let me try and say this a little more clearly. Rashi says that you need an actively negative intention. Tosfos says apathy is enough. Why is apathy enough in to exempt you from the Tzilas Neshama? Says Tosfos because it's a Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa. I'm not doing it for the positive intention and purposefulness that parallels why it was done in the Mishkan. Now I have a question on Tosfos. Surely Tosfos started the whole sugya by telling us that the rules of Melachas Mashaves don't apply to Mekalkel. In which case, how can the rule of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa apply to Mekalkel? Answer. Evidently Tosfos holds that the exemption of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa has nothing to do with Melachas Mashaves. Were it to be to do with Melachas Mashaves, the Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa wouldn't apply to Mekalkel. If Rashi holds that the exemption of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa is because of Melachas Mashaves, then the exemption of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa wouldn't apply with Mekalkel, in which case apathy, we would understand where Rashi held that apathy isn't enough to exempt you, because Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa isn't an exemption by Mekalkel. Why is Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa not an exemption by Mekalkel? Because Melachas Mashaves doesn't apply by Mekalkel. In which case we would understand why Rashi says you need an active negativity rather than just apathy. So what that means to say is that a suggested answer to Rashi is that Rashi learns Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa is not an applicable halachic principle with respect to Mekalkel, since with Mekalkel, according to Rabbi Shimon, there's no need for Melachas Mashaves. Or to put that differently, there's a machlokas Rashi Tosfos whether the exemption of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa is because of Melachas Mashaves or not. Now, what is the exemption of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa? Tosfos says it isn't about purposefulness. You can do a melacha very purposefully and still be exempt because of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa, unless it's the same purpose as it was done in the Mishkan. Which means to say it's not a Melachas Mashaves typed in. Melachas Mashaves means I need to do purposeful Mashaves. I did a melacha purposefully. I just didn't do it for the same reason as it was done in the Mishkan. Nonetheless, it's exempt. Meaning to say, Tosfos learns it's not a Melachas Mashaves typed in. It's a rule of needing to do a melacha similar to the purpose it was done in the Mishkan. So since Tosfos learns it's not a Melachas Mashaves type halacha, therefore Tosfos learns that the rule of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa would apply even by Mekalkel. Melachas Mashaves doesn't apply by Mekalkel. But in every other respect, it has to be Dumiyat Mishkan. It has to be done in the same way as it's done in the Mishkan. And here, where I'm apathetic about the results, I'm not doing it for the same purpose as it's done in the Mishkan. Therefore, I'm exempt. Rashi, however, learns that this concept of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa is a general rule of purposefulness. I have to do a melacha for something purposeful, not for something negative, like removing a problem, like catching a bead so it won't sting me. According to Rashi, that it's a purposefulness law. It's part of the family of rules to do with Melachas Mashaves, and therefore, since by Mekalkel, according to Rabbi Shimon, Melachas Mashaves doesn't apply, nor would Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa apply. In which case, the reason you're exempt when you're trying to kill Chilazon can't be because I don't care about it, therefore I'm apathetic, it has to be because I actively don't want it. So it would be, I think, a reasonable explanation in Rashi on the sugya, and it's therefore consistent with Rashi's view on the sugya. I should mention that this argument about how to define the basis of the exemption of Melacha Shein Tzrich L'Gufa would also have a more general effect. What is the nature of the exemption? Is it just the clause of Melachas Mashaves, purposefulness, or is it because it's not Dumiyat Mishkan at all? It's not paralleling what was done in the Mishkan. There is a rule of Komlei Midrabamine. If I do a more significant Avera, I'm exempt from a less significant Avera. And this, the concept of the principle is effectively I don't get a more minor punishment if I've already got a more serious punishment. And the rule applies even in the case where I'm exempt from the more serious punishment for technical reasons such as shogeg, such as doing it by mistake. Would I be exempt if I do a melachot she'ein tzricha l'gufa at the same time as doing something more minor? Let's say on Shabbos, I smash up someone's fence. So I smash up someone's house. So I've done the melachot of soseh, and I'm also a mazik. Am I exempt for the damage I've done because I've been mechalel Shabbos when I've done it? So it depends on the nature of the exemption of melachot she'ein tzricha l'gufa. If the exemption is just menachet mashavos, I've done the melacha, it just lacked purposefulness. I'd be I would still done the melacha. I've still done the melacha on Shabbos, and therefore the rule of kom nei midrabaminei, double jeopardy, would apply. However, if the exemption of smashing the house is because it's not dumya to mishkan, according to Tosfos, I'm not doing it for the same intentionality as I did in the mishkan, then perhaps the principle of double jeopardy will apply. I did a melacha, I didn't do a melacha at all. And therefore, the kom nei midrabaminei wouldn't make sense in this case. I didn't do something that was dumya to mishkan. So these are important halachic matters to understand what the exemptions are. So just to again summarize what we've said, Rabbi Shimon holds that with chaburah, with netilas neshama, these are inherently negative melachos, and the rule of melachos mashavos doesn't apply. I'm suggesting that Rashi would learn that therefore the rule of melachos she'ein tzricha l'gufa also wouldn't apply, and that's why apathy isn't enough. You need active negativity. And I'm suggesting that Tosfos would argue with that, or not suggesting, this is the second half is explicit. Tosfos holds that melachos she'ein tzricha l'gufa is an applicable principle even by netilas neshama. I hope that was reasonably clear. I'm happy to go through this again on Tuesday if people want to text me off group if they feel this was unclear. I apologise that if it wasn't sufficiently explained. These are difficult matters, particularly on the Tanis, and there will to definitely be a show on Tuesday. I wish everyone a good and meaningful and not too difficult fast.
Thank you.
Thank you.